I opened my front door and instantly received a pint of sulfuric acid to my face. I was in agonising pain. I've often been asked to put into words how it felt. This is a man who drove 300 miles to the wrong person's house and threw a pint of sulfuric acid in someone's face. What did I do to deserve this? My name's Andreas Christopheros and I'm an acid attack survivor from 2014. So prior to the attack, I was a very power-hungry businessman, probably is the best way to put it. I was director of 9 companies when I was attacked. Married, had my eldest son, my only son at the time, Theo, who was 18 months old. I loved working. Work was a big part of my life. In 2013, I ran or oversaw 19 different events and festivals across our holiday parks. That year, 2014, was a transitional year for us in terms of business. We'd been put in a difficult position with the banks and were forced to offload our holiday parks. And I was in a transitional period of my life. I was still working a lot. I wasn't working in the same businesses. I was working more from home than what it would be normally. So life was busy. I worked a lot. In hindsight, I worked too much. That's something I've learned since the attack. But my focus was about building an empire. My whole world was about money and power. Sadly, now I know. But I was very intent on building a future for my family, building a future for my kids, or kid at the time. So I worked a lot. I now know I worked too much.
When you look back on those days now, what sticks out to you the most about the person you were then?
I often joke I'm a bit douchey, to be honest now. I drove fast cars, I holidayed a lot. I lived a really good life. I partied around the world. Festivals and events were a big part of my life, as I was just saying. So me and my wife were regularly travelling to some corner of the world to go and experience some festival. And as much as I don't regret it, my lives, there's 2 lives here. There's the life before the attack and there's life after the attack, are very different. And it's hard to choose which one's better between the 2. But I've certainly learned a lot about myself since the attack. And I've learned a lot about the mistakes I was making prior to the attack. And money's not everything.
And you'd recently had a baby before the attack.
So, yes, Theophilus, little Theo, 18 months old at the time, my firstborn son. When I got married, I always wanted to have sons. Being from a Greek Cypriot family as well, there's always this onus on wanting sons. And yeah, I was blessed with my son. And life didn't change too much when I was still working. We were still partying as well. We were still traveling the world and going to festivals. But it was nice to have my first son, and I owe that kid my life. If I hadn't have had a child when I was attacked, I would not be here today.
December the 9th, 2014.
Correct.
Can you walk me through that day? After the moment you noticed, I think it was a red van outside.
Working from home at that point. Living in Cornwall, we regularly have people come to and from the house delivering parcels. Just before Christmas, more so than normal. So people knocking on our doors, nothing out of the ordinary. I was sat in my home office, which overlooks the road. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just before, and I noticed a red Peugeot partner van drive down our road. And the reason why I clocked it was exactly the same make, model, and colour as one of the work vans that one of my staff drive. And I clocked this van thinking it was ours. I didn't realise it wasn't, and just carried on about my business. I was expecting my mum to turn up at some point. She was due to fly back to Cyprus that day, and I was driving her up to Bristol to take her to the airport. After seeing this van, there was a knock on my door a few minutes later, and I went and opened my front door, as I would to anybody, as I still do, and opened my front door and instantly received a pint of sulfuric acid to my face, whilst my attacker said, "This is for you, mate," and he ran. I instantly knew it was acid. And that was the first saving grace. My T-shirt, I was wearing jeans and T-shirts at the time, my T-shirt just disintegrated, it dissolved, just disappeared from top to bottom, just rolled away. I watched it just roll, just disappear into nothing. At that point I knew it was acid. My wife at the time had been up all night with Theo, my son, so she was upstairs in bed, which was the second saving grace because it kept them safe. She was asleep, so was Theo, and I screamed upstairs, screamed up to her, call 999, someone's just thrown acid in my face. Obviously that took a little while for her to compute, not really what you kind of were expected to be woken up by. So it took a few attempts to shout that to her, to get her going. I was in agonising pain. I've often been asked to put into words how it felt, and it's impossible. It's an impossible feeling to describe, and it's almost as if someone's thrown petrol over you and then chucked a match at you, but not quite. My face had swollen up very quickly. It was puffy, it was really puffed out, but it felt dead to touch. It felt numb. When I was touching it, it didn't feel like my skin. I ran through the house and got to the kitchen and started dousing myself with as much water as I could. I wasn't aware at the time that was the right thing to be doing or not, but logically it made sense. I'd worked around corrosive substances a lot in the hospitality industry. So that's what I was doing. I was trying to get as much water on my face as I could, whilst my wife at the time was trying to get an ambulance to us. As I was attacked, I remember seeing this Peugeot Partner, the red Peugeot Partner van, parked on the curb just outside my house. And I just have a split image of it, just a second viewing of it there, just slung with the door open, right outside my house. And I stayed conscious until the ambulance arrived, and got in the ambulance. I remember being in the ambulance and like needing to spit. I could taste the acid. It was in my mouth. I was like, I need to spit. I just spit. I was almost seeking permission. And I was like, just spit anywhere. Being too polite in the ambulance. And the police turned up shortly after, and I was fighting to stay conscious. I wanted to stay conscious for as long as I could, despite the pain. And I managed to give the police enough information about this van, and then I blacked out. I blacked out, I think, on my driveway of my house. Once I was in hospital, the fumes from the acid, the fumes from the sulfuric acid, were so severe that they had to end up evacuating casualty because it set off all the alarms. So whilst they were trying to keep me alive, they had to evacuate half the hospital because of the severity of the chemicals used. On the first night, they sat down with my wife and my mum and said, look, we don't think he's going to make it tonight. You've got to prepare. You've got to prepare for the worst. He's not going to make it through the night. My injuries, at that point, I had sustained burns to the face and my arms, my torsos. Scarring down my torso, scarring down my arms, scarring down my back from where the acid had been thrown from his 2 steps below my front door. So it was thrown in an upward motion, it hit the ceiling above me and then rained down on me. And I've got these 18 scar drip marks down my back, but they couldn't get me stable. It took them 24 hours to get me stable, enough to move me. They knew I had to get to a burns unit as quickly as possible. There's 6 specialist burns units across the UK. 24 hours later, 24 hours after the attack, they managed to get me stable. And at that point, they put me in an ambulance, drove me to Newquay Airport and flew me by aeroplane from Newquay up to Cardiff, where they took me to Morriston Burns Unit, where I remained in a coma for the first 6 days of being there, an induced coma. On the first night at Trelisk, though, there was a very dedicated ophthalmologist who is the unsung hero of the story, without a doubt. He that evening, that first night, he grabbed a chair, put it over on top of me, and sat on top of me in this ICU unit, and spent the whole evening squirting saline solution in my eyes. And if it wasn't for his actions, I would have been completely blind. 8 hours straight he sat there, just continually rinsing my eyes non-stop all night. And if it wasn't for him, I'd be blind, completely blind. So I woke up in an ICU at Morriston Burns unit 6 days after the attack. And at that point, my attacker had been arrested on the information that I'd given to the police. And if it wasn't for that information, they would have had no leads. We knew he had driven 300 miles from Hastings to my house and thrown acid in my face and then driven back up to Hastings. The police managed to catch the camera at the end of our road, catch his vehicle at the end of the road on the shop CCTV, and then they managed to track the vehicle along the motorways using the traffic cameras out on the motorways, so they knew where he'd come from. And they'd arrested David Phillips, my attacker, who at the time had refused to make any comments. Initially, he had said he was down here to sell a car, and he wasn't driving the car at the time of the attack. Someone was test driving it, and it was nothing to do with him. That was his first comment. But after that, he refused to make comment. He spent his time just not communicating with the police at all. I woke up in an ICU. It was a very weird environment if you've never been in one. I wasn't aware of how close I was to death. I wasn't aware how close I was to actually dying on the first night. And I wasn't aware of the risk of death that I was facing at that time. I woke up in an ICU, intubated, not being able to talk, and I signalled for a pen and paper. My father being a Greek Cypriot and me being his only son, I knew he would be struggling a lot with what was going on. The first thing I wrote down was, how's Dad? He wasn't in the room at the time. A few of my family were, he was not. And then they asked if they could get me anything. And the second thing I wrote down was a pint of cider. But it was kind of my way of showing my family and friends in that room that I was back and ready to take on this challenge. But from the moment I woke up, I was ready to take on that challenge. I was ready to move on my recovery. And there was times where I was getting frustrated. I wasn't getting enough rehab. I wasn't getting enough physio. I was pretty determined, even from early on. It was a horrible experience being in ICU. It's so weird because you have a nurse there with you 24/7. You have someone literally holding your hand 24/7. I never really realised any of that until you're in that position. And at that point, a very lengthy police investigation was already underway. The police thought I was going to die, so they have a protocol where they have to come and get as much information out of you as they can before you die. So they kept trying to get back into the ICU. They kept coming in to do interviews, and that in itself was difficult to deal with. And at times I felt like I was the criminal. The police couldn't work out why I'd been attacked. They very much were under the impression that I'd done something to warrant the attack. So at that point, they tore my life apart, looking for a reason to why I was attacked. The police were adamant I'd done something to warrant the attack. So at that point, nothing became ours. The police took our house, took our cars, sat-navs, phones, iPads, computers, anything physical, anything digital. Any email accounts, Facebook accounts, eBay accounts, bank accounts, Hotmail accounts, anything physical, anything digital that we owned, we no longer owned. And a very lengthy police investigation was underway at that point, which went on for the best part of 6 months really, before we got some steps forward. I spent a long time lying in a hospital bed, questioning my own sanity. Because the police were so adamant I'd done something to warrant the attack. You're lying there going, well, what have I done? What have I done to warrant this? You know, have I done something so horrific that I've blacked it out from my mind? Like, your mind plays games on you. When you are lying in a hospital bed for weeks or months on end, you're being pumped full of high-strength prescription drugs as well. It gets a very weird place. So you lie there a lot, trying to work out what the hell has happened. Why? What did I do to deserve this? But also how it was going to affect my family and how it was going to affect Theo, my son. I had made a conscious effort very early on not to get angry. I think anger is a dangerous avenue that you get lost in quite quickly. So anger was not going to come into play for me. But I for a while, I hadn't looked at myself. I hadn't wanted to look at myself, not until I was ready to see the burns or the scars. And thankfully, to the wonderful people at Morrison Burns, whatever room I went into, any reflective surface was always covered. Even a stainless steel paper towel box was always covered. Right? So I could never see my reflection until I was ready to see it. But the biggest issue for me was, how would my son see me? Would he be scared of me? Because I knew I was going to look different. One afternoon I had some mates come down from London, some of my old best friends. I was like, well, if I'm going to look at myself, I'll do it when the lads are here and we can have a bit of a laugh about it, rather than do it with my wife and get emotional. So we had a bit of a grand unveiling, so to speak, me and two of my friends, Ben and Charlie. And I was pleasantly surprised that day. But that was when you're burnt, not scarred. Scars take time to form. Obviously, after the attack, I was very red. My skin looked like it'd been peeled off a bit. They'd had to shave off all my hair, which I have a lot of hair, and I didn't like that at all. My hair stopped my scalp from getting burnt now, so there's that. Thank you for some very thick Greek Cypriot hair. When I saw myself, I was pleasantly surprised. Everything was where it should be. All my features were there. The thing with acid burns, is it burns you. It's like a surface burn. Whereas a flame burn, fire burn, will eat into your features. Whereas acid doesn't. So over time, scar tissue forms, and everyone scars differently. And there's no rhyme or reason for a lot of it. But as the scarring started kicking, as the scar tissue started to build up, that's when you start getting the deformity. That's when you start getting the things pulling out of shape. And over time, things can get quite tricky. So the scarring is more of a problem than the burn itself. But eyelids are the biggest problem. You can't replicate eyelids. It's the hardest part of the body to replicate. And although I've had countless procedures on my eyelids, they're never going to be perfect. But I lost my eyelids 4 times. And when I say I lost them, they had pulled down to the point where there was no skin left on the eyelids, and they were sat down here rather than on my eyeballs. I have these rings here which are faded, more so now I've got a tan. These rings around my eyes. Those rings there were originally the eyelids. So those would have been up. Not having eyelids probably is the most torturous thing I've ever had to deal with, because you can't hide from the lights. You can't sleep easily. You can't, even a slight gust of wind, a slight draft in a room is torturous. Lack of eyelids was probably the biggest and most challenging thing I faced. My wife and I had made a decision earlier on that Theo wasn't to come to hospital. We didn't need him to be at hospital. He didn't need to be at hospital. He needed love, support, food, toys, which he could have. He could have all that without needing to be in that horrible environment. So he was passed around from friends and family. He always had what he needed, but we didn't want him near the hospital. But then came the day where my wife brought him to see me, which was probably one of my hardest days. I spent ages lying in hospital thinking about things. And that was one of the hardest. The more you think about it, the bigger the problem, the bigger the monster it becomes. And how my son would perceive me became a monster in my head. My wife brought him down to see me, and she got him out of the car, and he took one look at me and grabbed my wife, and my heart sank. It was everything which I had, it was all my worst nightmares coming to fruition at once. But when he heard me start to talk, he knew it was me. And he stuck his arms out straight away and clung on to me for so long that day. Don't think he left my side for about an hour, just hanging around my neck. which was the most amazing feeling. It was a roller coaster of emotions, absolute roller coaster of emotions. After then, I was back in hospital every twice a week, in between Morrison's Burns units, where I'd have a lot of my plastic surgery, and Moorfield Eye Hospital in London, whoever saw my eyes. If we hadn't lost the eyelids, I probably wouldn't have lost the eyesight in my left eye. So I'm currently blind in my left eye. And on a good day, I'm good in my right, and I wear a hard contact lens, which brings me up to a decent level of vision. Scarring down my torso, obviously scarring down my face, scarring down my arms, scarring down my back. So we had yet another emergency meeting with the police, of which they told us they had bugged my attacker's family's car, and they had evidence that there was going to be another threat on my life. So at that point, we had to go rent some accommodation in the middle of nowhere in Cornwall, which isn't too hard to find. We were properly out in the middle of nowhere, under a false name, hiding from the world because the police told us we had to. Home office panic alarms, one in the house and one in my pocket that I had to carry wherever I went, because the police had evidence to suggest they were going to finish the job off. I had already got to a point in my head where I had accepted I'd never know why I was attacked. And I'd already accepted that, because I couldn't be wasting any more mental energy trying to fathom out why. The police couldn't find out why. We went through everything. You know, we had an extensive business portfolio. Everything got dissected. Everything. Then one afternoon, we had yet another one of these emergency meetings for the police, and the chief of major crimes took me to one side and said, "Look, Andreas, I believe you. I believe you didn't do anything. I don't know what happened, but I very much believe that you did nothing wrong." And that was a turning point. It was the first time in like 4.5, 5 months that anyone had pretty much given me reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind, you know. The police called another one of these meetings. And we all sat around a table, and they sat down and said, "We've got it. We've got the evidence." Which was the most bizarre sensation. Talk about emotional roller coaster. I did not know how to process those emotions. I exploded, I screamed, I cried. I was a volcano. I couldn't control those emotions. They had managed to find the evidence they needed to prove David Phillips was the person who attacked me, and the reasons why. And I'd given up hope. But thank you to Devon and Cornwall Police for that, because they had promised me they would, and they did. Even though at times I'd lost hope, and at times I was frustrated with them, they promised me they'd always get to that point, and they did. It was the day of the trial. I was suited and booted. I would have been the first witness of the day. I walked into the courtroom, Crown Court in Truro, and David Phillips was in the witness box. And I went up to the witness box and stared him in the eye, stood toe to toe with him, and walked off. And went to the witness room, sat with my father, and David Phillips was originally sentenced to life with a minimum term of 8 years. We were not satisfied the 8 years was long enough. Unbeknown to us at the time, David Phillips had appealed the life aspect of his sentence. And we'd already been told the judge acted fairly. We'd already been told it was in line with other case law. And his appeal got granted, which was baffling. If one appeal's not back on the basis it's in line with case law, judge acted fairly, yada, 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 then you expect the other one to be knocked back as well. But that wasn't that case. So as much as we got to sentencing and you kind of think it's over, it's not. So then another few weeks passed and it was the appeal hearing. And that day, three one of the highest ranking judges in the UK. 3 judges at the appellate court deemed David Phillips not to be a danger to society. This is a man who drove 300 miles to the wrong person's house and threw a pint of sulfuric acid in someone's face. These 3 judges deemed him not to be a danger to society and lifted life from his sentence, lightening his sentence to 16 years, of which he would only serve 8 inside. David Phillips actually only spent 5.5 years in jail before he was moved to an open prison near his family in his hometown, so he could get a job and be close to his family after 5.5 years. I'm 11 years on, or coming up to 11 years on, 10.5. I'm still regularly having surgery. I still regularly have to come to London for procedures. I still have very extensive reconstructive surgery every single year. The cost of the transport for that alone sets me back about £6,000 each year. The cost of the crime caused by David Phillips is monumental and is completely overlooked. The cost to the emergency services, the cost to the ambulance service and the police service and the investigation, and the cost to the NHS. The cost to society as a whole. Acid attacks have become normalised in UK society, and it's a very scary statistic. The cost to me, physically, emotionally, financially. I lost a fortune. I lost businesses. I lost my career. I lost my future. I obviously lost how I looked. I lost my face. And I battled with my mental health. And he only spent 5.5 years inside. And because of that, I have spent the last 10 years campaigning for change, campaigning for tougher sentences, campaigning for change in legislation, and campaigning for a better future for acid attack survivors, because to date, a sentence has not been given to fit the actual crime of the horrific attacks that have taken place.
You mentioned it was the wrong person's house.
Correct.
Mistaken identity. How did you find that out?
We were told the intended victim lived on my road. We were told he lived a few doors down, so we know David Phillips turned up at the wrong house. But I know that he didn't live at that address when I was attacked, so even if David Phillips had turned up at the wrong house, at the right house, he would have still got the wrong person.
Am I right in saying he wanted to attack someone who had sexually abused someone that was close to him?
Allegedly. But yeah, David Phillips was taking revenge for something he believed had happened to somebody in his family.
I feel like there's an incredible defiance in you to not let it affect your life, to move on and live a life that isn't completely defined by, like I said, what happened. Where does this come from? You mentioned your son. I think you've had another child since. Is that a big part of it?
I don't think anybody knows how they are going to act in a situation until they've really been put into one. If you had said to me, this is going to happen to you, how do you think you're going to react? I would never have said in this way. Like, for me, it became quite binary. You have a choice. You have a choice of curling up in a ball and crying yourself to sleep, or begging for the physio to come drag you out of bed and take you to the gym. I don't know how I became so resilient. I had good friends around me. You don't need loads of friends in your life, but you need good ones. My kids definitely have given me reason to pull through the dark times. You know, I've dealt with the attack in a remarkable way. I'll be the first one to say that. I'm fully aware. I've found strength from it. I've become more confident. I know a lot of acid survivors generally go the other way, whereas for me, it went, I became stronger. And that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This is a prime example of that. But also the campaigning for me, something which is rare for an acid attack survivor to put themselves on that pedestal, to go out and put themselves in the spotlight. That's been therapy. That's been my way of dealing with it. You know, I'd rather educate. I'd rather go out and try and make a difference and make a change. and talk about what happened to me. And because of doing so, it's opened so many doors. You know, it's a win-win, really. I am the UK ambassador for Face Forward International, who are a Beverly Hills-based surgical reconstructive charity over in LA. I've never hid away from any of it, as much as the times where my ex-wife, she would be out for dinner and she'd be like, they're looking at you. And I was like, and? Who cares? But she would get really upset because people are standing there staring at me. I couldn't give a damn. So with my kids, we'll go to the park. But it got to the point where Theo, my eldest, he would, and he still is my number one. He's always got my back, that kid. He would, if other kids said something derogatory, or he would take them to one side and explain to them what had happened. You know, we're talking about a 4-year-old. I've never cared what people think about how I look. There comes a point when you realise more so that the majority of people look at you because of strength. They don't look at you because of pity. You know, people are often embarrassed, you know, and that will be the emotion. Or you walk into a room and they'll feel embarrassed about how they look. Whereas I learned that the majority of people would, you know, you walk into a room and people are there staring at you because they see strength, they see something different, they see you stood on your own 2 feet, they don't see someone carrying away. Something that carried me through the early days a lot. I received hundreds, if not thousands, of messages from around the world on social media. Complete strangers. My ex-wife used to sit there in the evenings in the hospital, sitting reading these comments that people have sent to me. Just hundreds of them. And they were so fulfilling and rewarding to hear these comments from people. And one that always stuck out was this mother of 4 from Uganda who had taken the time to send me this really positive message and wish me well and send me her prayers from Uganda. So not giving a damn really is probably the answer to that question. I'll never know how I ended up at this level of resilience, but I'm thankful I am.
If you could go back and speak to yourself on the night that this happened, what would you tell him now?
Ooh, don't open the door. Sorry. It's a good question. One I've never been asked before. If I could go back and talk to the former me, I would tell him to reevaluate his life choices and not spend every waking minute wanting to build an empire. Because I lost out on so much on my other side of my life.
For anyone watching this who might be struggling either with something similar or with trauma, injustice, or pain that they never asked for, what would you want them to take from your story?
My advice to anyone who's struggling through a trauma or a difficult situation, and a big part of my recovery is normality. It was fighting for snippets of normality. When your whole world's been turned upside down, to be able to try and ground yourself with some level of normality. For us, it was watching trashy TV for 15 minutes in an ICU in the evening, or something that you would do normally. And take those little bits of normalcy and build up on them. But when your life's really turned upside down, you know, someone comes along and breaks it down into many little pieces, smashes it to bits. You're never going to build that life back up to be the same as it once was. You can, similar, maybe, but it will never be the same. Whereas I'd rather take those parts and build a much stronger machine. And that's what I believe I've done this time around.
And finally, if you could speak to David Phillips, the man that caused all this, what would you say to him?
So David Phillips has asked to speak to me many times, and I've refused it. So restorative justice, where he is given the opportunity to reach out to me. He has applied, I think, 3 or 4 times for restorative justice, of which I have denied, because I see no benefit whatsoever for myself. Huge benefit for him, without a doubt. There's nothing he could say that could change what has happened. Nothing. He's wanted to. He's tried to. He's wanted to write to me, and I've refused it all. I don't believe there's anything I could say to him that would be worthwhile. But on the flip side of that, I've never felt angry toward David Phillips. The judges, the 3 judges at the appellate court, yes, they had a job to do. Their job to uphold justice, and I don't believe they did their job. David Phillips made a massive mistake, clearly bad information or not that smart or whatever, but he didn't intend to hurt me. He intended to hurt someone else, yeah, he shouldn't be, but he didn't intend to hurt me. So I've always believed there's very little David Phillips could do to say, and there's nothing I would want to say to that man.